Hi, it's Jo and Steve from Freshagenda, and we're back with a bit of an update on our global dairy directions outlook, and it's improved this month, Steve.
Yeah, for a welcome change. People will be keen to see that we're actually talking the market up at the moment, Jo. I guess weather has been the biggest thing that we've seen, we are seeing. It's not so much what's happening right now, but it's what's coming, I guess, on several fronts. So that's probably the biggest part of the news. If we look into Europe, we've already seen that milk's been fairly tight, so the market for products has remained quite tight. The supplies of cheese and butter remain a bit stressed, and we're only going to see that, we think, get a little worse as that milk supply growth just doesn't occur.
And the month-to-month watching of individual countries and their milk growth continues, and it's slowed again this month. So that tightness is continuing, but it's really the outlook that the weather outlook that you're...
Yeah, we rely on weather forecasters that got it so horribly wrong in March when they didn't see the beast from the east coming. Those same forecasters, however, have got a pretty grim picture going out over the coming months. So it's going to be a long, hot summer in Europe, long, dry, hot summer in Europe. By all reckoning, that's already happening in some regions. So there's already some impact being felt right now on the ground. So our contacts in the area suggest that this is going to get a bit worse, and that will essentially keep the butter supplies tight. Butter is the core of the issue in Western Europe, and keep obviously cheese markets fairly firm as well. So as we go across the year, that ripples around the world, and we'll keep markets fairly firm.
Yeah, and just sticking with I guess the weather situation across the Atlantic, there's a developing situation in the US that we'll be watching over the next couple of months.
Yeah, the US Southwest has a drought which is deeply affecting Texas and New Mexico, and that's not changing much. It's spreading slightly. So the dairy effect, it's early to call. The immediate impact is probably on hay. The cost of hay pushing up into already pretty ordinary margins for producers. But I guess the challenging thing for the growth story in the US is most of the growth has come from that region.
That's right.
While there's not a lot of pasture, bought-in feed is critical to milk margins, so it'll be interesting to see how that plays out as we go further.
So that might keep margins a little bit tighter than we were originally seeing in the US later in the year. Yeah,
the cheese prices should rise, and this may spur that along. But if costs go up, you're probably not much of a change. So it'll keep a cap on more solid growth, and we might see the numbers prune back a little bit. And I guess the good news in that is, again, if that crimps the cheese market, pushes up cheese prices a bit, US cheese onto the world market will be a little firmer price, and that's a good thing too.
That's right. So more weather. In this part of the world too, it seems more likely that we'll be having an El Nino event upon us in the spring. Yeah,
so the little Spanish boy will arrive in spring and make it harder to grow grass and crops in Australia. Already we see an effect in Australia of drought throughout New South Wales into northern Victoria, which has pushed up feed prices. We're showing here the latest weekly feed grain price numbers, which have shot up quite a bit recently, and that's already being felt by dairy farmers.
Yeah, and also in New Zealand on the east coast there will likely be some impact if it is an El Nino event.
That's right. Yep. So, Jo, something you've had a bit of a look at, and we can't escape it in dairy headlines, is what's happening with the M. bovis disease in New Zealand and where that's got to.
Yeah, the big news of the week, of course, is the government in New Zealand has decided to try and eradicate M. bovis from the herd in New Zealand. So they're talking about culling of 126,000 cows. It's about 3% of the population. The herd. It's still a bit early to call what the likely impact on production will be, but obviously for individual farmers it's possibly quite devastating. And doing a bit of reading on the issue, really good article by Keith Woodford. If you want a bit of an overview of what's happening, do yourself a favour. But particularly about notice of direction farms that don't necessarily have an outbreak in their midst yet but are at risk. A lot of their operations are being very severely hampered already. So this is quite a complex situation.
Yeah, I think it's the complexity that's the hardest thing. The operational, on the ground implementation of this is going to be pretty tricky for a lot. And to say there's a sweeping impact on production is hard to call until farmers have got choice.
Yes.
There's a lot of discretion involved. This could go many different ways yet. But I thought the interesting thing was that the seriousness of the issue. We have the Prime Minister of a country talking about a dairy disease in animals. That's interesting just to think about.
What does it all mean for the value of milk in Australia, I guess, is the key question.
So I guess what we're going to see, we're putting out a new and revised outlook for milk value, and we're talking it up. So that'll come out next week. We've seen a number from New Zealand. Fonterra's put out a number, $7 per kilo. I would say that's looking pretty good at this point. There's a little bit of off GDT money into that number, and they've pulled back dividends slightly, showing up in their share price we've just seen. But if we were to look at our outlook now, we'd say a $7 number looks pretty much on the ball for what we're seeing. The impact of all that stuff we've talked about, tighter European markets, that'll flow into there. So yeah, I expect our number will have a 6 in front of it as to what we think a full year forecast looks like.
Well, Fonterra will be very relieved to know Freshagenda approves their forecast.
They will breathe easier, that's for sure. So Jo, there's been a bit of stuff about an index. Yes,
the industry index. Hold on to your hats. It's all going to be okay because it's coming out mid-year.
Right. And what's it going to do? What's it going to show?
The details are still a bit sketchy. They'll be using GDT, which is interesting because there's not much cheese that gets sold through GDT. It's mostly about whole milk powder, and some ABS data to build an econometric model. Well-known global dairy analyst Deloitte Access Economics will be doing that, and there'll be a retrospective regional price that farmers themselves will have to provide the information for.
So look back to look forward. Yeah. That's interesting. Anyway, in the meantime, signing off this week, here's one we prepared earlier. That's good luck from us.